Okay. Okay.
Let them in?
Let them in.
It's recording. Until I do this, it's okay, right?
Uh-huh.
Your Samo is there. Okay.
Excellent.
Let me on.
Okay. Right. Welcome, welcome, everybody. Hi. Going to be a bit chaotic as we get everybody organized, but you'll mute. Make sure you mute everybody except Samo. Great. There's Samo. And get grinding before him. Okay. Somebody has their microphone on, so we could ask everybody to turn their mics off. Put a message on the screen. Yeah? All right. Sorry, Samo. I'm just grinding the coffee, and then we'll be 1 sec. Right, is everybody muted? Great. Okay, we're about to begin. I'm just grinding my 4th coffee. Samo has the same coffees as us in Switzerland, and we're just going to make sure that we do this at exactly the same time, and then okay. So there was some background noise because somebody left their microphone on.
That will be me. The background noise is coming from me. So
okay, Samo.
I'm sorry. I'm here in the lab. It's rather noisy, but that's how it will be. Sorry.
Okay, right. So we'll get going. Welcome everybody to an amazing event today, as we are going to be talking about acids in coffee. A fascinating subject, something I thought I knew a little bit about, but it turns out that the little bit I knew is actually minuscule, and there's a whole lot going on in coffee acidity. So who better than to talk to a coffee science specialist, a coffee scientist in Switzerland named Samo Smrke, rather well known in the world of specialty coffee actually, just got back from Boston, and I look forward to hearing much about that. But let me introduce him now. Samo Smrke, welcome to this amazing event today, and thank you for talking to us today.
Hi Tim, hi everybody who's joining this call. Welcome. Yes, thanks for your introduction. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this event. My name is Samo. I am a coffee scientist by background, actually a chemist. So we are here now in our chemistry laboratory where we analyze composition of coffee. We can analyze aroma, acids, caffeine, glycolic acids, anything related to chemical composition of coffee. And we use this to better understand the coffee in terms of any kind of process that we're dealing with. So for example, we want to understand roasting. We have a roaster here, and we hook it up to this machine back there, and we see what is happening during the roasting process. So online, we see which aromas are generated, how they're generated, how the roast profile affects this, how different coffees are behaving differently, and so on. And we have a sort, basically all kind of studies that we're doing are from green coffee side, farm side, processing, roasting, packaging, coffeeness, extraction, sensory, so we're everything about coffee science.
Amazing. And we're going to talk today about acids in coffee. And actually, to highlight that, the reason why we're talking to you about acids this month is because our Coffee Club edition this month is about acids. And we have 4 different types. Let's get pouring the water into them. Well, first we'll talk about the dry aroma. But because cupping takes about 10 minutes to steep, I thought we could talk a little bit about the dry aroma, get pouring the coffee, and then we'll talk some more. So acids in coffee is a very interesting subject. And I'd like first, before we go into it, just to talk about the dry aroma. Is there something with acidity that you can detect already right now with the dry aroma in coffee?
Yeah, it's rather hard to say in this case because none of them would be as strong as it would be considered a defect. But in principle, acetic acid, if it's very strong, you can perceive it as aroma. It's one of the rare. So acetic acid, formic acid, these are acids that you can smell them because they have a strong smell. So these could be perceived as an aroma. Whereas, for example, citric acid, malic acid, you can't smell those. Even if in their pure form, you don't really smell them, right?
Fascinating. So, are you picking up any of the acids right now?
Right now,
acetic?
not really. I don't pick up the acetic acid, and I assume the one with carbonic maceration. Typically, there will be a lot of acetic acid and the naturals. But these have very intense aromas. These coffees are very fruity fragrance, and it's not picked up. I don't really recognize it. But it's a good thing because if you start to recognize acetic acid in your coffee already from the fragrance, it means there's too much of it and probably will not have a balanced acidity in the cup.
That's a really good point. Yeah. So pungent smells can already be an alarming warning about acidity in coffee. Interesting.
Yeah. Because
So,
vinegary smell is typical of acetic acid indication.
Right. And what about light roast in general? Because these four coffees are obviously light roasted coffees. And if we talk about acids in coffee, generally speaking, that mainly applies to light roasted coffee, is it not right? That once you start to get into medium and dark roasts, you're losing a lot of the acid.
It's actually we are losing less than you would think. So actually, if we take a specialty coffee that has very high acidity in a light roast, if we roast this coffee dark, it would still have a lot of acidity. It's typical that we use when we have commodity coffee roasted dark that we don't have acidity because there's no potential in the green coffee. But if we roast specialty coffee dark, it typically has still a lot of acidity. Of course, it is less than light roasted coffee. Wow. But it's a combination of both. It's a combination of the coffee and of the roasting process.
I see. Okay, so let's pour the water now, and we'll talk a little bit about each of the coffees, because we have four very distinct coffees. Okay. So, we're pouring now. Number one.
Okay.
Right, and the wet aroma should release some interesting smells as well. Coffee number one, we have designated as malic acid. This is by Manhattan Coffee Roasters, and I've learned a little bit about malic acid. The interesting thing is the word malic comes from malum, which is the Latin word for apple tree, I believe. So malic acid would be one of the easier ones to understand, I think. Then we've got coffee number two, which is we're representing as citric acid. This is a Rwandan coffee by Mock Coffee Roasters. And yeah, citric acid. We'll talk about that soon as well. Coffee number three is it's a Honduras by Abstract. That's the one with acetic acid. So very curious to learn more about acetic acid's properties. And finally pouring coffee number four, which is Solberg and Hansen, a Colombia washed, and this will represent ascorbic acid. Okay. So just so everybody knows, this is what we do each month, is we put a theme around the four coffees. So the theme here is acids, and that's why these four coffees might not necessarily be acid crazy. We didn't pick coffees that have an abundance of acid. It's just that we made sure that each coffee has at least a strong representation of 4 different types of acids in coffee. What I've learned, here's the interesting thing, is that when you taste one acid in coffee, it probably means you have a whole bunch of acids. It's not as simple as 1 or 2 acids in a coffee. I can't wait to learn more about that. Sam,
Exactly. That's the very interesting thing about acids is that we don't have, for example, you're talking citric malic because they're known acids from other fruit. In coffee, we don't have only citric acid in a coffee that is citric and only malic acid in a coffee that is malic. They're all very, very similar in content. We're talking about 20-30% differences. It's not that there's a massive difference between different the contents of different coffees. And in particular, what is interesting is that it all interacts together with the overall acidity of the coffee and the aroma. Because, for example, measurements have shown that a Kenyan coffee will typically have less citric acid than a Brazil natural coffee.
Right.
But it doesn't. The Brazil natural coffee doesn't have the total acidity as the Kenyan coffee has. So it means that in a Kenyan coffee, the citric acid is more pronounced. You can taste it much better, whereas in a Brazil natural coffee, it's very muted. This is because the total acidity and the pH on the Kenyan coffee will tend to be going towards the acidity.
Right.
So it will be a lower pH of the brew from a Kenyan coffee compared to a natural Brazil. Even though, for example, like I said specifically, a natural Brazil coffee has surprisingly more citric acid than a Kenyan coffee.
I'm curious. In the making of a coffee, in the production stage at the farm, what would be more responsible for creating the acids in the coffee? Would it be the process or the altitude at which the coffee is grown?
The tree itself.
Tree itself.
Tree itself, because the citric and malic acids are product of the biological products of the tree itself. They're important for the tree to produce the energy through photosynthesis. It's even called the citric acid cycle. It's the way how the plant is dealing with the energy in the cells, and this is where the citric acid is generated. Of course, then the environmental factors will have some effect. How much of it is stored and how much of it is not stored. So there will be, like I said, certain environmental factors that might affect, but it's mainly the tree itself, it's mainly the farming.
I see. Okay, well, let's break the crust now and talk a little bit more about the 4
I have to run to
coffees.
get my cupping spoon, we'll be right back.
Okay. Now, hopefully he has one of these cupping spoons as well. This is a sipoon, which we use to measure the sips. A pointless thing, but a lot of fun. What we'll do is we'll break the crust in all 4 coffees, see if we can pick up more of this acidity. Like I said, we've got citric, malic, citric, acetic, and ascorbic acid present in all 4 of these coffees. Whether you pick that up in the aroma or not, let's see. So coffee number 1, this is the malic acid. You may pick up other acids in the smell or not, but just tell me if you're picking up anything already, Samo. Sweetnesses. I'm getting a lot of sweetnesses, that's for sure.
That is, I'm getting a lot of differences in the aroma profile, but those don't directly indicate. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of differences in the aroma profile, but those don't indicate the acidity.
Agreed.
Directly. So no, they do by experience. So if you know that you have a typical aroma of a washed coffee, that it will be much more acidic than a natural, and vice versa. But this is because of our experience of knowing the coffees, and not the. It's not the reason to say it this way. It's not the reason why washed are more acidic, feel more acidic, or they are more acidic than natural. But it's kind of our experience that we know that this is the case when we smell the coffee.
Yeah. So this is probably my most interesting question, and it reflects on the trippy nature of acids. So there is a difference between actual acids in coffee and perceived acidity. So basically, something like an optical illusion for your taste buds is going on, where you can think you're tasting certain acids, but they're not even there. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, exactly. We have to think about the same thing, as the sensory descriptors of coffee. Because when we talk about, coffee and has sensory descriptors, something crazy as raspberry, lemon, grapefruit, something like this. There's no really same compounds in as you find in raspberry or same ones as you find in grapefruit. It's our perception of the coffee that is like this. And now, same thing is when we have acidity. If we talk about the acidity, it's we detect it with our tongue, not with our nose, right?
Right.
So the receptors are on our tongue, but what we smell with the nose is also important because there's always a relation. If we smell the smell of an apple and then kind of reminds us of the malic acidity, and then the smell of a lemon will remind us of citric acidity because we know this from the fruit. And therefore, it's connected the same way in the coffee as well.
Excellent. Do you want to spoon your coffee so we can move forward? Okay. Right. So he'll get his spoon, and then I'll taste the coffee, and we'll talk more about the actual acidities in this coffee and illusionary acids. Guys, you're having problems hearing Samo, is that correct? Samo, I think some people are having a bit of microphone issues. Might be the sound is quite muffled. Can you keep the microphone maybe a bit further away from you? Excellent. Not activated.
I can check the sound.
It's better now. I think it was the background noise.
Yeah. There was a bit noisy here because some people came in.
Sorry about this. Okay, so Samo's now going to remove the surface of the coffee as we do in a cupping, and then we can taste them. I think we've steeped as well, haven't we? How long have we got left?
5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. So I'm very impatient in cupping, so I always want that part of the steep to go faster. While we're doing this, Samo, just want to ask you, what do acids actually do to our senses in terms of taste, smell, and tactile? I did see you talking about the tactileness. So
yes, so there's two things that the acids do. So basically, the acids will have to react with our receptors in our cells on our tongue. So these receptor cells, they have a membrane which is able to let the acids through, and then the acids react within the cells to neutralize chemicals, so chemical molecules in the cells, and we perceive this as acidity. So they really need to chemically fit into these cells through the membrane and react. So this is a really chemical reaction that is happening. It's a neutralization reaction. It's like taking a wine taking something acidic as vinegar. So vinegar, and if you combine vinegar with something that is alkaline, like soda, and you mix them together, you have a chemical reaction. If you ever did this, you know that you produce a CO2 through these neutralization reactions, and you get a lot of foam, and it also heats up, and so on. It's like you're doing this in a bulk, this reaction, but this is the same reaction, same type of reaction is happening on our tongue, in our receptor.
And so why is it in different parts? Why is it I might taste certain acidities in different parts of my mouth?
It's just your perception. There's no. This is kind of a myth that we got taught in schools. It's we don't distinguish different parts on the tongue, different tastes. So all the receptors are kind of evenly distributed around our tongue.
Right.
It might be related to the mouthfeel. So if something is very acidic, it might be so acidic that it damages the surface of our mouth. So then we're talking about the mouthfeel effects from the acids. And if something is very, very acidic, like going to extremes, it can be astringent for this reason. So it will be an unpleasant dry mouthfeel caused by the acids.
So could you say that acids are a big part of mouthfeel? Are they maybe
No, they're not. They're not important for mouthfeel. They would only be involved in mouthfeel if we go to extremely high concentrations of acids. So this perhaps if we have a coffee that is still roasted until the start of first crack, which has like extremely strong acidity, that would be perhaps something where astringency is caused by the acids. But normally it's more of a perception that we have through acidity, that it's like, feeling of the acidity is also causing increase in saliva flow, salivary flow. So we have to produce more saliva because we start to feel the acidity. So this might be some indirect mouthfeel that is caused by our body reacting to the acids.
Wow. That's such a complicated thing going on, but really interesting. Can you tell me about this pH and titratable measurements that you use? Can you bring it up on the screen? We've got this great chart that Pull and Pour and yourself designed, which I think is fantastic. Basically, you designed it and he brought it to life in a really great way. But this looks like it's about finding the right balance of acidity. And just if you could explain this chart for us, that would be great.
Yes. So in this chart we have two parameters that affect how we perceive a coffee. One is pH. Perhaps you know the pH. pH tells us how acidic something is. So if we have a pH of 7, it means that it's neutral, it's not acidic. If we have a pH number that is lower than 7, it will be acidic. So typically a coffee will have a pH of around 5. So a very acidic coffee, like a good Kenyan light roast, will have around 4.9, 4.95, whereas a dull coffee will have a pH of 5.4 or above. This is where we have very little acidity. Then but this is only the measure of the acidity of the how potent the material is or a solution is as acid, but this doesn't tell us how much of the acidity there is in total. So with this, we can measure. It's possible to measure as titrable acidity. So what is titrable acidity? Titrable acidity is a measurement where we add a base, which is the counter, a molecule that is the other than the acid, and then we're adding it until we get to a neutral point. So once we have a neutral point, then we know how much we added the base, and we know how much of the total acidity we have. And why is this important? Important is that because our receptors to perceive the acidity don't work on exactly how we work by how we do measurements. They kind of work like the titrable acidity concept because the molecules are neutralized in our receptors, but it's also important how strong of an acid something is. So both are important for the perception of acidity, both parameters.
Wow. It's a very useful chart as well, so I look forward to using it. What do you think are the common acid types that we can expect to find in coffee beyond the 4 that we have represented today?
So these 4 are 3 of those are found in coffee. So typically we find in terms of quantity, we find the most of quinic acid in coffee, citric and malic. In terms of quinic, yes. In terms of strength of the acid, acetic is important because it's already strong, but also it's a very small molecule. So you don't need to have much of it to have more molecules in the solution. Because when you look by acidity and you want to measure it, if you look in mass, how much milligrams of something is in your beverage is sometimes not important as much as how many molecules are, because there will be, for example, 3 or 4 acetic acid molecules per one citric acid molecule if both are 100 milligrams, per 100 milliliters of the beverage. So it has to do with the strength, the number of molecules, so we call the molarity of a solution, and the amount. So it's a rather complex thing that we're dealing with. That's why it's also quite complex to describe the acidity and why sometimes very small changes will suddenly bring big changes into the perceived acidity.
Okay, so maybe guide me through some of those differences between perceived and actual. Let's start with coffee number one.
Yes.
This is, can you bring the coffee bags up so we can see which ones you're drinking? Do you have the bags?
So this is, I don't have them here.
Okay.
So this is number 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Excellent. Okay, so number one we're doing is El Vergel. This is Manhattan, malic acid. Let's taste it now, see if we can pick up more acids than just the malic. Well, I am definitely getting the malic acid, if that's what I'm supposed to be detecting. Apple, acidity. Can you describe how someone might understand if they are tasting malic acid? What they should confirm in their mind?
It's a relatively mild acidity, pleasant. It's not harsh. And yeah, apple-like reminiscence. So if you reminded you of apple, that's a good indication that you would say this is malic acidity.
Anything else? Are you picking any other types of perceived acidity?
I think, in my opinion, malic and citric are very close and can be easily deceived. We can be easily deceived by the aroma. Right. So if, for example, if a coffee has more stone fruit-like aromas, you will tend to say, oh, this is more of a malic acidity here. But if a coffee has clearly citric aromas, then we tend to say this is citric acidity. So it's very hard to say if now from tasting this coffee, it's incredibly hard to say that this is actually a higher malic acid content.
Okay, interesting.
So this is what is very interesting and exciting here, because there's so much interaction coming into it has a role in understanding the coffee. It's kind of a multi-sensory experience. So our nose is the most important part of perceiving the coffee, and our tongue is the second most important part in the coffee. And then it's our eyes. We see the color of the crema, the color of the beverage, and so on. And our nose is really leading our tasting. That's why it's sometimes hard to really draw parallels of what we're perceiving to what we actually are tasting.
Yeah, I mean, what about retro tasting? Do you ever sort of do a scientific analysis of how we taste with our nose?
Yes, we can do this. So this instrument back here, what we can do, it's the world's most sensitive instrument to detect aroma compounds.
Wow.
And what we can do, we can measure the aroma in our nose as we exhale air. So it means you have to swallow a coffee, you sip a coffee, swallow it, and once you swallow, you breathe in the aroma to your lung and then breathe out through your nose. And once you breathe out through your nose, it goes through our receptors in the nose, then we smell it, and then we can measure the composition in our breath that we're breathing out. So how much of different aromas from coffee is in our breath.
That's an incredible machine. Wow. I'd love to test that. So let's do coffee number 2 now, which we said was representing citric acid. This is by Mock Coffee Roasters, and it's a Rwandan red bourbon honey process. So I'm actually quite surprised that he's managed to give us a coffee that has citric acidity in a honey processed coffee. It's not a very strong citric acidity. It's quite gentle. But are you picking it up?
I am picking it up. I agree. It's a very gentle one. Mm-hmm. In my experience, honey processed coffees, I usually perceive more malic-like acidity.
Agreed.
Especially in the Costa Rica honey process. Typically, for me, this is malic-like acidity. But of course, our perceptions differ. That's why we have different people, different opinions, and we enjoy the coffee The only thing that is really objective of what is in is when you put it into an instrument, right?
Right.
But the bad thing is that once the instrument measures how much of the different acids are in coffee, it's really hard to say about how it will taste like. So we always need both, you know. We always need, if you want to describe a coffee, we need people, and it helps if you have real measurements to understand it better.
Yeah, and in terms of perception versus reality, I've been learning that you can identify flavors if you have tasted a lot of foods and your brain can connect with the memory of those tastes. Mm-hmm. Is acidity the same? Are you connecting with the memory of acids you've had?
Yes. Yes, I think you're connecting the memory. That's why I said earlier, you know, typically if a coffee smells like stone fruit or apple, you know, then you will connect it to malic acidity. If a coffee smells citrusy, you will connect it to citric acidity. Right. So you can trick your mind by making a solution of malic acid and adding some lemon aroma to it, and it will be very citric-like feeling. Because these, you know, the perceptions between those how these acids are perceived are kind of close. Yeah, they are different. Obviously, there are obvious differences, but they are very close in how we perceive it.
Interesting. Okay, I've got a very. Oh, sorry.
Yes,
carry on.
Yes, well, I just want maybe to be able for you to better understand why the smell is so important. You can think of, you know, what is the minimum that you need to able to detect that something is a coffee, that a solution is a coffee. So if you close your nose and you're in another room and somebody brings you a coffee and you have your nose closed and you don't breathe through your nose at all, and you take a sip of the coffee, it will be very, very hard for you to distinguish is this a coffee or not. Because it will be a bit sour, it will be a bit bitter, it might have, you know, slight astringency, probably not sweetness, and that's it. You know, you're not really, and you could be fooled that this is something else than coffee.
Wow.
But if you get a coffee and you just smell it, you know that it's coffee. So we identify it based on smell. That's why I said the smell is the primary tool that we use to taste coffee.
Amazing, yeah. So I've done that a lot, where I block my nose and taste something, and I can see how much less I'm tasting. So it's. Are you saying that the smell almost takes a more important role than taste, and we don't know it?
Definitely. Smell has the most important role in our perception of any beverage or food.
Incredible. So one really complicated question, because you talked about the different types, when two acids of the same titratable acidity, one with the lower pH has more acid taste. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So typically this will be the case. Studies have found this. So if one acid is stronger than another at the same amount of acids, then the stronger one will be more sour.
That's crazy.
This is not so interesting. This is actually, you know, from a fundamental point of view, very interesting, because we don't know why exactly this is the case. Although from a coffee point of view, they have quite similar pH values. And if you have like a pour-over brew or cupping and an espresso, they don't have, you know, extremely different pH values. But the titrable acidity is very, very different, because it's kind of related to the brew ratio that you're using. So espresso will have much higher titrable acidity than a pour-over, you know, like 5 times higher.
Fascinating. Let's go on to.
Yes.
Have we done 3 coffees or 4? Let's see. We've still got to deal with.
We have
ascorbic acid. Is that right? And
we still have the
acetic.
Carbonic maceration one, the acetic, and yeah.
So let's do the acetic acid. Now this is the one that you said you might be able to smell in the dry aroma, because acetic has that. Is it acetic or was it ascorbic?
Acetic.
Acetic. Are you picking it up?
Yeah, there is very little.
I'm getting a lot of tanginess at the back of my mouth. What would be
There is,
creating
yes.
that type?
There's also, I feel this one has maybe, something could be related to acidic, because acetic acid is a rather strong acid, and it's known that natural coffees, and the more extremely they are produced, the more of acetic acid there will be in those coffees. So carbonic maceration is the extreme, where in some measurements that we did, there was maybe 10 to 20-fold more acetic acid in a carbonic maceration coffee compared to a washed coffee. So this is really a product. This one, is a product of the post-harvest process. So it's much related to the post-harvest process. Although there are, chemical reactions that happen during the roasting process, where this one is the acetic acid is also generated. So if there's no acetic acid in a coffee, in a green coffee at all, the roasted coffee will still have some of it.
Wow.
Just not a lot. Whereas if you have some very fermented natural coffee, then you start to get a lot of acetic acid in your roasted coffee.
So is it acetic acid being manufactured from thin air if it doesn't have it there already, but the process or the roasting?
Yeah, it's from the process. It's from the microorganisms are manufacturing it, so to say, yes.
Wow.
During the post-harvest process, yes.
Incredible. Okay, so the fourth coffee is ascorbic acid. This is a Colombia washed coffee by Solberg and Hansen. And let's taste it now and see if we can pick up ascorbic. So first tell me, what would I expect with ascorbic acid?
That's a really good question that I cannot answer, really. I have never tasted ascorbic acid. The vitamin C is ascorbic acid. It's used quite often in foods as a preservative because it's a very strong antioxidant and an acid. So it has two rows. This coffee is slightly darker roasted than the others.
Is it?
Quite interesting. Also the crema on top, the crust was quite a bit darker.
I'm quite surprised. Solberg and Hansen are Norwegian, and they love their light roasted coffee.
Yes, it has quite more complexity in the aroma because of this, and probably it fits this coffee very well.
Interesting. It's very, very low acidity. It's tasting right now. Very low.
That's why I think it's washed. It's comparably lower to the others. It's very interesting, but it's not strong, but bright kind of acidity.
Yeah, what do you mean by bright? Because strong acids I can understand.
Yeah. It's kind of. I think it well integrates into the aroma with the aroma.
Right.
So it's not. You can say, oh, okay, this has an acidity, but it's not overpowering the perceptions. Whereas sometimes, a very light roasted washed coffee would have very strong acidity, but it would be like sour, unpleasant, too strong.
Yeah.
And here it's clearly a very fruity coffee. I mean, this one could say, I think, if you would say it's a citric acid, I would say, okay, yes. For me, this is also citric.
Interesting. So you are picking up the citric.
Yes, definitely. For me, this is, especially now that it's getting slightly colder, for me, this is very, very citric.
That's really interesting because we got different types of citric then, and they're both very gentle citric. I used to think that citric meant bright, juicy oranges or lemons, but it can mean a lot of things. It can actually be one of the most gentle acidities.
Yes, it can be. Yeah, it can be gentle.
So,
if we compare to the other citric that we had, this one here is clearly more gentle, but it's the same type of perception of the acidity, and that's what I meant. It's slightly darker roasted, so there's a bit less of the acidity, but it's the same time.
Right. So what's interesting about ascorbic acid is it's just one molecule away from citric. So they are connected. Vitamin C, citric, ascorbic.
There's a similarity in terms of structural. Yeah.
Oh, your microphone.
Although in the chemical world, if something is very similar, it's not necessarily close in terms of perception that we have. A really good example. This is a very nice example. Is the aroma compounds that are responsible for the smell of lemon and orange. So these two compounds, they are exactly the same chemical structure. Exactly the same. Only one is a mirror image of the other one.
Really? Oh, wow.
And one smells like citrus, like lemon, and the other one will smell like orange.
Wow. Just being a mirror image. Wow.
Just a mirror image. So if it's a mirror image, only without looking at knowing at the other one, you cannot say that they're different. They're exactly the same structure, just a mirror image. How the atoms are distributed in the molecule. Only a mirror image.
That's what you're smelling. The smell of an orange is a reflective smell. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's a very interesting
That's
phenomenon.
fascinating, Samo. So I want to ask, to wrap up my questions, I've learned over the years that if you brew certain ways, you can control sweetness and you can control acidity. Is there any sort of tips you can give people to control acidity in their coffee when brewing? Always good to hear from a scientist.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so the acids are very easily extractable from the coffee. So it means that if you're under extracting your coffee, you're pretty much extracting nearly all the acids that you already have, that you have in the coffee. So acids are really quickly extracted. But then you're not extracting other things that you still have in the coffee. So kind of under extracting coffee, you're showcasing the acidity better because the acids are already there in your cup and the other things are not. And if you want to mute the acids, you cannot avoid to not extract them. They are always in your cup very easily. So it means that you have to extract more of everything else, so over extract, that you will kind of mute the acids. And this way, what we're doing we're kind of dialing in, for example, espresso. We want to have a balance between acidity and bitterness, and then we want to be somewhere in between where we have this balance.
Excellent. Well, we'll definitely be practicing your instructions.
And something else, water is also important.
Right.
That's the second thing. So now this is only the extraction, but water is also part of the extraction. So water is very, very important because if you have water that is high hardness, high alkalinity, it will neutralize the acids in coffee. And this way, you can very well modulate, without doing the actual differences in extraction, just by water, you can modulate the acidity in coffee very, very well.
So if I wanted to get water that was ideal for brewing, would I be looking for low pH or any particular
So you
kind
need
of
very
thing?
soft water for brewing. That's ideal. You start with very soft water, and you can make it harder if you need the water to mute the acids. But it's good to start with as soft water as possible for brewing. For pour over, it's good to have soft water. Of course, not distilled water because you need some minerals to bring out the flavors of coffee. But it's better that it's softer than harder.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Let's get some questions now. We have a question from Winelist HK. Could we use water pH meter to measure coffee pH? And for titratable acidity, are there any suggested ways to measure it with economical tool? Thank you for a great presentation.
Yes, there are. You can use it. Yes, you can use. Perhaps for espresso, you might damage the electrode with time, but for filtered coffee, it should be okay to use. Of course, don't forget to rinse it afterwards. So don't worry that it would leak something in your beverage. It's potassium chloride. It's a salt that is slightly leaking, but it's also both potassium and chloride are present in water, in coffee, and so on. So there's no issue of using it for beverages, the pH meter. But it's in incredibly small amounts that this is. You will get some potassium chloride in coffee. It's very small amounts. In terms of titratable acidity, for this, you need, normally it's done by color indicators, but because coffee is dark brown, you cannot use color indicators. So you need a pH electrode to measure continuously the pH while you are neutralizing your coffee. So of course, it's possible to do quite economically such a measurement, but you need to know the chemistry behind it. You need to understand what the titration is, how you calculate your solutions, how you prepare your solutions, and how you do the titration itself, and then how you calculate the values, the titratable acidity. So it's not a too complex thing to do, but it's for sure for somebody who has some knowledge of chemical background, because if not, at least you need to use some rather aggressive chemicals to do this, to prepare your solution and do the titration.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you for that. And Tai Dang has two questions. One is, how does the roasting process affect the different types of acids? Are new acids generated, destroyed at specific degrees?
Yes, so there's two things happening. Citric malic acids, they are being destroyed during the roasting process because they're present in the green bean, and they always decrease during the roast. For example, quinic acid is formed by the roasting process because it's formed from the degradation of chlorogenic acid, which has a quinic acid part in the molecule. So a darker roast will have slightly more quinic acid than a lighter roast. That doesn't mean that quinic acid is not a nice acid. It's a very, very clean tasting acid if you taste it on its own. So it's not bitter as some people think. That's a myth. So quinic acid is a very pleasant tasting acid. Even in high concentration, it will not be too sour. So it's kind of like similar to malic acid in terms of taste.
So what's creating the bitterness that you get?
The bitterness is it's another degradation product of the chlorogenic acid that I mentioned. It's phenylidans. It's a group of compounds which are just extremely bitter, and they're generated when the coffee is when the material is very dry and very high temperature. So it means dark roast when all the moisture is gone during the roasting, and high temperatures. Then these compounds are created, and that's why dark roast coffee is very bitter.
Unbelievable. Okay, so question 2 he asks is, could you share some thoughts on CGA? Do you count CGAs as acids similarly to citric and malic, etc., in your research, or is CGA a completely different ballgame?
That's a really good question. So there's two things that might be here playing a role. So CGA, this chlorogenic acid, they are in very high amounts in coffee. They're in green coffee. They're in such high amounts that if you calculate what the pH of the green coffee should be, or of a light roasted coffee, it would be a very, very low number, like 2 point something. So extremely acidic, like it would not be able to, the plant would not be able to function biologically at these harsh conditions. That's why what is taught is that the CGA is not as an acid in plant, but as a counter ion to the acid. So chlorogenate is called. So it means that you have that is already, to put in other words, in the chlorogenic acid is most likely already neutralized in the coffee. So it's not there as an acid. It is as an, think of having an acid and then neutralizing it, and then what you're left with is what is in the coffee. Because you can see this, that you don't have the right pH for the amount of chlorogenic acids that you have. So if you just try to pulverize green coffee and put it in water, you'll have maybe pH of 6, something around 6. So it's not so acidic. So it means that there is not so much acid available there. Or in other words, glucogenic acid is neutralized. The citric and malic acid, but you need some reactions during the roasting process to make the coffee acidic as it is. So the green coffee is not as acidic as a coffee roasted to around first crack. I think around the first crack is the maximum of the acidity of a coffee.
Okay, well, I hope that answers your question, Tai Dang. It was a very technical one. We'll wrap up now. A fascinating conversation, and you've taught us a lot. Thank you, Samo. Just tell us, what else is going on with you these days? Anything exciting?
Yes, there's a lot of exciting things going on. We always have new projects. Also, one of the things that we're trying to understand is better understand, like this last question is actually a very good one with the roasting and acids and using different origins and how they different origins will impact in different varieties the acidity. And we always have a lot of fundamental research studies going on. But also, what we do is also we have a course, an online course which is called CAS in Coffee Excellence, and this is an online course where we want to communicate or teach coffee knowledge based on science. So really, it's a mostly theoretical course, an online course, theoretical with practical experiments, practical assessments within the course, but everything can be done online. And it is right now, in my opinion, the most comprehensive set of information you can get about coffee. Because there's where it differs, for example, the more known coffee skills program by the SCA is that the goal is to learn skills about coffee. Our goal is to teach students about knowledge about coffee, to really have focus on the knowledge, on things that we're talking today about acids, to understand why, why we are tasting what we're tasting, or why this is happening in coffee, to answer these kind of questions.
And it's a real rabbit hole, I believe. I mean, do you find that when you go into one thing, you could also then go deeper and deeper endlessly?
You always find new things that you cannot explain, and then you need to go back to the start and try to think about deeper. Yes, coffee is a fascinating subject. It's very complex. We don't understand everything about coffee. About half of the composition of the brew that we're drinking is, to be honest, unknown. We don't know what exactly it is. We have some ideas what those compounds are, but not exactly. So there's a lot to be researched in coffee. But on the other hand, we know a lot about coffee because it's one of the most researched foods with many scientific publications, scientific books about coffee. So we have learned a lot about coffee. That's why we have the knowledge. We can explain, for example, in terms of acidity, we have the knowledge to explain these different acids, how they interact, the roasting, a lot of chemistry in the background to understand this. But then again, we always find, like the saying, it's a rabbit hole, you go in, you find things that we don't know, and that's what we're doing in our research group.
Well, keep up the great work, Samo. It's fantastic. And if you guys want to follow Samo and his amazing work, you do have an Instagram account, and do you have a website people can follow?
Yes, we have a website. I can quickly,
we'll add the link at the end.
Yeah.
We'll add all the information for people to follow. And do check him out on Instagram as well, because that's where we first discovered you. And we love the work you're doing and the amazing research. Thank you for tasting the same 4 coffees with us today as well. And a great experiment, and we learned a lot. Thank you, Samo.
Thank you so much again, Tim, for inviting me. It was really a pleasure to talk to you here about some of my favorite topics about coffee.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. That's it. You can leave. Okay. So shall I just wrap up when Samo can go? I'll just say to everyone that we have still got our live cupping. We've still got shipping. Shipping is late this month, and I'm really sorry. We're waiting for one coffee. So as soon as that coffee arrives, we ship out. You'll get your 4 coffees this month. It might mean that you get next month's very quickly because of the late shipping this month. We're very sorry about that, but you will be getting your coffees. Nothing will stop the Right Roast shipping these coffees out. And that's it for today. Thanks for joining us. A super exciting event. The next one will be on Instagram, and then our cupping here on Google Meet is every month. So thanks for joining, everybody. Sign up if you haven't already. The Coffee Club is the best coffee subscription in the world. So if you haven't joined already, you're nuts. Thanks for joining again today, guys. See you all very soon. Stop recording.